I knew Karen had been in my pool again the moment I saw the towel. It was pink, monogrammed, and folded neatly over my deck chair like a calling card from someone too smug to realize I could spot her perfume from 100 feet away. Lavender and arrogance. The water was still rippling, even though it was only 7 in the morning. My security cameras hadn't caught a thing because she knew where the blind spots were. That wasn't an accident. I'd installed those cameras myself, and I'd noticed one mysteriously shifted last week. Karen's pool privileges, if you could even call them that, had been revoked months ago, but apparently, the rules in her world were more like suggestions. The first time she'd trespassed, it was an accident. Her words. She'd leaned over the fence to ask about my solar heating system, her way of pretending she cared about anything other than how I could afford it, and I caught her son, Tyler, doing cannonballs in my pool. The second time, she blamed her HOA role. As board vice president, she said, I need to ensure community standards are maintained. I'd asked which part of private property. She didn't understand. She smiled that brittle suburban smile and said, the part where you think you're not part of the community. That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, I'd found wet footprints on the deck, sunscreen smears on my lounge chairs, and once, a half-empty bottle of Chardonnay sitting beside my skimmer. So this morning, when I found that towel, I didn't even get mad. I just smiled. Because this time, I had proof, and something a lot more interesting than proof. See, 2 nights earlier, I'd spread a fine layer of ultraviolet powder across the pool steps and the handrails. It's the same stuff used by security companies to catch thieves. You can't see it in daylight, but under a UV flashlight? It glows bright neon blue, like radioactive guilt. My theory was simple. If she used my pool again, she'd walk away glowing like a Vegas sign. By noon, I was pretending to prune my hedges when Karen came jogging down the cul-de-sac in her blindingly pink workout outfit, hair tied high, face too perfect for someone naturally beautiful. She waved, fake as always, and called out, "Morning, neighbor." I waved back, just as fake, and noticed the small shimmer of moisture on her hairline. Chlorine doesn't lie. She had the nerve to stop by my mailbox, pretending to stretch. You really should cover that pool when you're not using it, she said. It's a safety hazard. I nodded. You're right. Someone could get hurt. Especially if they trespass. She gave a tight laugh, the kind people give when they've just realized you know something. Then she jogged off, trying too hard to look casual. I went back inside, checked my cameras again, and waited for evening. At around 9, I saw flashing lights outside. 2 HOA trucks and a cluster of neighbors. Karen was standing under the street lamp, arms crossed, looking furious. When I stepped out, she turned like she'd been waiting for me all night. You need to drain your pool immediately, she snapped. It's leaking into the greenbelt drainage. I blinked. Really? That's interesting, because it hasn't rained in 3 weeks. Don't play dumb, she said. We got a complaint. The HOA will be issuing you a notice tomorrow. The other neighbors looked uncomfortable. They'd seen this movie before. Karen acting like she was the sheriff of a town no one elected her to run. I just shrugged and said, fine. I'll deal with it in the morning. That seemed to disappoint her. She was expecting a fight. Instead, I smiled, went back inside, and waited for the real show. Around 10, I walked down the street with my UV flashlight in my pocket. Karen's porch light was still on. She was in her driveway, talking loudly on her phone. Probably reporting me to someone who cared as little as I did. When she turned to go inside, I flipped on the light. The beam cut through the dark like a blade, and instantly, her forearms lit up bright blue. Not faintly. Not subtly. Glowing. Like someone had dipped her in highlighter ink. I froze mid-step. She didn't notice at first. Then she saw the light's reflection on her car window and stopped. She looked down at her arms, confused, rubbing them like she could erase it. For a second, I almost felt bad. Almost. The next morning, she was wearing long sleeves. It was 92 degrees. She avoided eye contact as she collected her mail, and I caught a glimpse of faint blue under the collar of her shirt. The powder doesn't wash off easily. It clings. The irony made me grin every time I thought about it. But that wasn't the end. Because Karen doesn't lose quietly. She came back swinging, the way entitled people always do when cornered. 2 days later, I got an HOA violation notice. Improper chemical use in shared drainage system, it said. Attached were 3 grainy photos, close-ups of my pool deck, my filter unit, and my storage shed. Someone had clearly trespassed again to take them. I called the HOA office, but their manager, a nervous guy named Glenn who'd been trained to fear Karen more than reason, said they'd investigate further. Meanwhile, I got a letter on my door that read, "Stop poisoning the neighborhood." In pink handwriting. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I realized Karen had finally given me permission to go nuclear. I spent the next day setting up new cameras. Real ones this time, high-end with night vision and cloud backup. I aimed one directly at the fence where she always slipped through, another at the gate latch, and one facing the pool. I even left the gate slightly ajar as bait. 2 nights later, the trap sprung. At 2:13 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I tapped the feed and there she was. Karen, in a white robe, tiptoeing through my gate like she was in a spy movie. She carried a flashlight, scanning around like she expected to find something incriminating. She crouched near my filter, probably hoping to take another evidence photo, then straightened and walked to the pool steps. Her reflection shimmered on the water as she knelt down, fingers brushing the surface. I hit the intercom button. My voice echoed through the yard. "Careful, Karen. You'll glow again." She screamed, dropped the flashlight, and bolted for the gate. The sound of her robe catching on the latch was better than any movie soundtrack. By morning, I had everything backed up. Footage, timestamps, audio. I didn't send it to the HOA. Not yet. No, I was saving it for the perfect moment. Because the thing about people like Karen is they can't stand losing quietly. And once they realize they've been outplayed, they don't stop, they escalate. So I waited, smiling to myself, knowing this was only round 1. When I woke up the next morning, there was a brand new community emergency notice, taped to my mailbox. It looked official, the HOA letterhead, the seal, the works. But the tone was pure Karen. All residents are reminded that chemical contamination in shared drainage areas constitutes a Class B violation. The responsible party must cease all hazardous activity immediately. It was signed not by Glenn, the HOA manager, but by Acting Environmental Compliance Chair, Kay Whitmore. That was new. Karen had just promoted herself. I took the paper inside, boiled some coffee, and laughed until it hurt. She must have stayed up half the night writing that letter, trying to make it look official. She probably even used that fancy home printer she bragged about during last year's HOA bake sale. What fascinated me most wasn't her nerve, it was her desperation. She couldn't let go of control, not for a minute. She needed to be right, needed to win, needed the universe to acknowledge her as the suburban queen she imagined herself to be. That meant she'd keep pushing until she got burned. By noon, I had 3 missed calls from Glenn. When I finally answered, he sounded exhausted. "Listen," he said quietly, "can you just come to the HOA office this afternoon? Karen's filed an incident report. It's complicated." "Let me guess," I said. "She thinks I'm running a meth lab in my pool filter?" There was a long pause. Then, almost sheepishly, he said, "Something like that." When I got to the HOA office, Karen was already there, sitting in the conference room with her arms crossed, wearing a pastel blazer and sunglasses indoors. Even with the lenses on, I could see the faint bluish residue creeping down her wrist. She'd tried to scrub it off, but UV powder doesn't care about Clorox wipe. She looked up when I walked in, smirked, and said, "I hope you brought a lawyer." I sat down across from her. "No need. I brought common sense." Glenn looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. "Okay," he began, We've had a complaint that your pool system is discharging something fluorescent into the neighborhood drainage. Ms. Whitmore says she has visual proof." Karen slid a printed photo across the table, a blurry image of my pool steps glowing faintly under a blacklight. I recognized it immediately. She must have taken it right before I caught her that night. "See," she said triumphantly. "Illegal chemicals. You're contaminating the water table." I studied the picture for a moment, then looked up. "That's UV tracer powder," I said evenly. "It's completely harmless. It's used for detecting trespassers. Which, by the way, you were." Her face stiffened. "Excuse me." I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and played the night vision footage. The room filled with the soft hiss of rustling leaves and the clear image of Karen climbing through my gate in her white robe. Glenn's jaw dropped. Karen lunged for the phone, but I tilted it away, letting the video play until the moment she screamed and ran. "Would you like me to forward you the full clip?" I asked Glenn. Karen shot to her feet. "This is harassment. He's stalking me." I set the phone down gently. "No, Karen. I'm documenting criminal trespassing." Glenn raised his hands, trying to calm her. Okay, let's take a breath. Karen, maybe we should review this before we—" "I'm pressing charges," she snapped. "He's violating my privacy. He's filming me without consent." I almost laughed. "On my property?" That's when Glenn made his biggest mistake of the day. He sighed and said, "Maybe we can all just agree to delete the footage and move on." Karen smiled like a cat being handed cream. I leaned back and said, "Sure. I'll delete it, right after the police finish their copy." The room went dead quiet. Karen's face drained of color. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I'd love not to," I said. "But you left me no choice. You broke into my yard twice, fabricated HOA letters, and spread false accusations. I'd say it's time to make things official." She stormed out, muttering something about lawyers. Glenn stared at the table, rubbing his temples. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he said. "Immensely." He sighed again. "Look, just give it a few days. She'll cool off." But Karen didn't cool off. She did what Karens always do when cornered. She found new angles. 2 nights later, I was sitting on my patio, sipping tea, when the sound of giggling drifted over the fence. Not kids, adults. I turned on my porch light and saw movement behind the hedge. Someone was throwing something into my pool. I waited until the splashing stopped, then went outside with my flashlight. Floating in the shallow end were half a dozen tiny bath bombs, fizzing pink. I picked one up and read the label. Ocean Breeze, Skin Brightening Formula. I didn't even need to guess who'd done it. Karen had decided to return my so-called chemical contamination with her own spa treatment. I could have called the police right then. But that wasn't my style. I prefer letting arrogance self-destruct. So the next morning, I made a call of my own, not to the HOA but to the county health department. I told them I suspected someone was disposing of unauthorized cosmetic products into a residential drainage system. They promised to send an inspector within 48 hours. I gave them Karen's address. That same evening, she was out front watering her hydrangeas like nothing was wrong. Her arms still faintly glowed when the sunset hit just right. When she saw me watching, she gave that tight little smile again. "Lovely weather," I said. "Hope you enjoyed your little prank," she replied. "But next time you try to poison me, maybe don't leave video evidence." "Oh, don't worry," I said. "I'm sure the county will figure out who's really contaminating what." Her smile faltered for half a second, just long enough to tell me she'd heard. The inspector came 2 days later. A calm, polite man with a clipboard and a UV scanner. He walked the cul-de-sac, checked drains, and politely asked Karen if he could test the runoff from her backyard. She tried to refuse, but he reminded her it was a public drainage line. I watched from my window as he waved the UV wand. Even from 20 yards away, I could see it. Her fence, her patio stones, even her garden hose, glowing bright blue. The look on her face was pure panic. She tried to explain, hands waving wildly, claiming she'd borrowed some cleaning supplies from me and must have accidentally spilled something. The inspector wrote steadily, nodding, unimpressed. When he came to my door afterward, he smiled faintly. "You said it might be her?" "Just a hunch," I said. "She'll probably get a warning," he replied. "But that stuff's everywhere. Hard to hide." For the rest of the week, Karen disappeared. No morning jogs, no lectures about property values, no random HOA notices. It was bliss. The street felt lighter, like someone had turned off a constant background hum of irritation. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd won. Then Friday came. A certified letter arrived, postmarked from Whitmore and Associates Legal Consulting. Inside was a formal notice accusing me of defamation, privacy invasion, and emotional distress. It demanded that I cease dissemination of digital recordings and publicly apologize for false accusations. I read it twice, chuckled, and folded it neatly into my desk drawer. She didn't even hire a real lawyer. The letterhead was homemade, same font she used for bake sale flyers. Still, I knew what this meant. The final act was coming. Karen wasn't retreating, she was reloading. And when entitled people reload, they don't use logic. They use spectacle. I poured another cup of coffee, sat by the window, and stared at my pool shimmering under the afternoon sun. Somewhere behind those hedges, Karen was plotting. And that was fine, because she wasn't the only one with a plan. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening, 6 p.m. sharp, at the community clubhouse, a beige brick box that smelled like old coffee and laminated authority. Karen had circulated flyers around the neighborhood all weekend. Urgent community discussion, chemical safety, drainage hazards, and neighbor accountability. No subtlety, no restraint. Just classic Karen. I knew exactly what she was doing, building a stage, gathering an audience, trying to turn humiliation into theater. When I arrived, every chair was filled. Couples in polo shirts, retirees clutching notebooks, parents balancing toddlers on their lap. At the front table sat Glenn, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 1 week, and beside him, Karen, resplendent in a white blouse and pearl earrings, her smile frozen like porcelain. I couldn't help but notice that, despite the heat, she'd chosen long sleeves again. "Thank you all for coming," Glenn began nervously, shuffling his papers. "We're here to discuss recent concerns about pool safety, water management, and neighborhood relations." Karen leaned toward the microphone, voice syrupy sweet. "Some of us," she said, "have noticed unusual substances being used that could endanger our children, our pets, and even our property values. It's tragic that one resident's poor decisions could affect everyone's safety." Her eyes locked on mine like a sniper scope. I smiled back, calm, patient. Then she produced a small UV flashlight from her purse. "This," she declared dramatically, "is what revealed the contamination. Watch." She strode down the aisle toward the projector screen, where someone had pinned a printed photo of my pool steps, the same one she'd used in her complaint. She shone the UV light across the glossy paper. A faint blue glow appeared. The crowd murmured. "See," she said, triumphant. "Toxic residue." A man in the back raised a hand. "Wait, isn't that just how UV powder works? My kid's science kit does the same thing." Karen's smile twitched. "This isn't a toy experiment, Mr. Feldman. This is a public hazard." Glenn cleared his throat. "Karen, maybe we should." But she wasn't done. "This community deserves to know who's putting us all at risk." She turned to me. "Care to explain yourself, Mr. Lawson?" Every eye turned toward me. I stood slowly, hands in pockets, giving her the silence she hated most. "Sure," I said. "I can explain." I walked to the front, calm as a surgeon, and pulled out my phone. I used a harmless tracer powder to confirm who's been trespassing in my yard. "Would you like to see what I found?" Karen's smirk faltered. "You're lying." I plugged my phone into the HDMI cable dangling from the projector. The screen flickered, then filled with night vision footage, crystal clear, time-stamped. Karen creeping through my gate in her robe, flashlight in hand. The collective gasp from the audience was delicious. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, is that her?" Karen lunged forward. "Turn that off!" I froze the frame right as her glowing arms reached for my pool ladder. "See that blue?" I said. "That's the same UV residue she just demonstrated. Turns out it's not contamination. It's karma." A ripple of laughter broke out before Glenn could gavel the room back to silence. Karen's face was crimson now, her mouth opening and closing with no sound. "I should note," I continued, "that this footage was provided to the county inspector last week. He confirmed no chemical hazards on my property, but found significant residue at hers. So before we talk about public safety, maybe we should discuss trespassing, evidence tampering, and false reporting." For once, Karen was speechless. Her fingers twitched like she was trying to reload words, but her brain jammed. Finally, she snapped, "You had no right to film me. That's illegal." I raised an eyebrow. "You were on my property at 2 a.m. Someone in the crowd snorted. Another whispered, "Classic Karen." Glenn leaned into his microphone. "All right, I think we've seen enough. Let's—" But Karen slammed her palm on the table. "This is slander. He's manipulating the video. I'll sue every one of you who—" "Karen," Glenn interrupted, his patience finally snapping, "sit down." The room went silent. Even she froze, stunned that someone had dared to speak to her like that in public. Glenn exhaled heavily. "You've harassed a resident, forged HOA documents, and embarrassed this board. You're suspended from all committee activities effective immediately." Her face twisted like a mask cracking. "You can't do that." "I just did." She grabbed her purse, shoved papers off the table, and stormed out, heels echoing across the linoleum. The door slammed so hard the projector flickered. I unplugged my phone, nodded to Glenn, and walked out through the side exit before anyone could corner me for gossip. Outside, the night air felt cooler, sharper, cleaner. I could hear frogs croaking by the pond behind the clubhouse. For the first time in months, I thought maybe it was over. But I should have known better. Karen doesn't surrender. She retreats, re-strategizes, and retaliates. The next morning, a neighborhood Facebook post appeared. "Beware of predatory neighbors." It read, "Posted by Concerned Resident 78. The post accused me of voyeuristic behavior, manipulating video footage, and threatening HOA officials. It didn't name me outright, but the comments section did the work for her. Within hours, half the neighborhood was arguing, some defending me, others clutching their pearls. I ignored it. I didn't feed trolls. But I did screenshot everything. Evidence always pays dividends. That evening, as I sat by my window, I noticed Karen pacing in her driveway, phone to her ear, voice rising. Her husband, Mark, stood nearby looking exhausted. He'd always been the quieter one, friendly nods, polite waves, never part of her chaos. But now he was shaking his head, gesturing toward the phone, clearly saying something like, "Stop. Enough." She turned away from him, shouting louder. Then she caught me watching. For a moment we locked eyes. Her face softened into a smile, not warm, not friendly, but calculated. The kind of smile that says, "You think you've won, but I've got another move." 2 days later, I found out what that move was. A city code enforcement officer knocked on my door. "We received a report about unauthorized pool lighting," he said. I blinked. "Lighting?" He handed me a complaint form. It claimed I'd installed unapproved UV and LED illumination systems in violation of city lighting ordinances. Of course, she'd found a new angle. If she couldn't prove I used chemicals, she'd go after the light I'd used to expose her. The officer, to his credit, seemed skeptical. "I just need to verify your setup," he said. "Won't take long." I led him to the backyard. He looked around, scribbled something on his clipboard, then smiled faintly. "You've got standard LED garden lights. Nothing illegal here." Do you get these kinds of complaints often? I asked. He chuckled. Usually from the same few names. People who think they're running a city out of their subdivision. When he left, I felt that mix of irritation and satisfaction again. Karen was predictable, but persistence like hers had a way of wearing you down. I needed to end this cleanly, permanently. So I set a new plan in motion. I ordered a discreet UV security floodlight system and installed it along the fence facing her yard. Totally legal. Motion activated. Invisible during the day. But under certain conditions, say, someone sneaking around at night, it would illuminate any lingering residue still clinging to skin or clothing. I didn't have to wait long. That weekend there was a pool party at the clubhouse. Kids splashing, music playing, families laughing. Karen showed up late, dressed in her signature white blouse again, pretending nothing had happened. When dusk settled, the floodlights flicked on automatically. A soft glow rippled across the hedge line, and faintly, unmistakably, her sleeves lit up blue. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. One kid pointed and said, "Mom, why's Mrs. Whitmore glowing?" Karen froze mid-step, realized what was happening, and bolted for her car. I didn't have to say a word. The neighborhood did it for me. By the next morning, the Facebook group was a war zone of memes and speculation. Someone had posted a photo captioned, "When you glow harder than your personality." Her social empire collapsed overnight. But as I sat on my patio that evening, watching the reflection of the pool lights shimmer across the water, I couldn't shake a feeling. Satisfaction, yes, but also curiosity. Because people like Karen don't disappear quietly. They go underground, regroup, and come back with something nastier. And sure enough, 3 nights later, I heard the sound of glass breaking near the fence. The sound of glass shattering jolted me upright. It wasn't loud enough for a car accident, not sharp enough for gunfire, but it carried that unmistakable edge of deliberate destruction. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the patio. The pool glowed soft blue under the moonlight, rippling quietly. Then I saw it, the back fence. The top panel had been smashed in, shards of tempered glass from my solar lanterns glittering across the concrete like ice. For a few seconds, everything was silent again. Then came footsteps, fast, retreating, crunching through the gravel path behind the hedge. I shouted once. The footsteps sped up. I caught only a flash of white fabric and a messy ponytail disappearing into the shadows. Karen. By the time the police arrived, she was back in her driveway, robe cinched tight, feigning surprise like she'd been woken from a dream. The officer, a weary-looking man who'd clearly handled too many HOA disputes, took one look at both of us and sighed. "So, you're saying she broke your fence?" "Yes," I said. "You'll find glass dust and shoe prints that match her sneakers." Karen gasped theatrically. "This is ridiculous. He's obsessed with me. He's been spying and harassing me for weeks. Now he's inventing crimes." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, were you outside tonight?" "Of course not. I was asleep." He looked at the glass-strewn deck, then at her robe, stained faintly at the hem with dirt. He wrote something down. "We'll file a report," he said carefully. "But without video, there's not much we can do." That was the first time I regretted turning off my cameras earlier that day. I'd been reconfiguring the system, replacing the SD cards. Bad timing, poetic irony. Still, the officer warned her not to approach my property again and suggested mediation. Mediation with Karen, like reasoning with lightning. The next morning, she went on the offensive. By sunrise, a massive sign appeared in her yard, facing my house. Private property. No trespassing, no filming, no poisoning. Bright red letters, crooked, nailed into a wooden board. It looked deranged. Neighbors slowed their cars to gawk. I could have torn it down or called the city, but I didn't. I just smiled and mowed my lawn, because every petty act she did was ammunition for me later. That afternoon, I got an email from Glenn. "Please attend an emergency HOA hearing tomorrow. Allegations of harassment, property damage, and conduct unbecoming. Attached were blurry photos of my broken fence, and a statement from Karen claiming I'd staged the break-in to frame her. She'd flipped the script perfectly. It was exhausting, yet impressive in its pettiness. When I arrived at the hearing, half the board already looked guilty for being there. Glenn sat in the middle, flanked by two other members, Janice, who hated confrontation, and Carl, who never missed a chance to stir the pot. Karen sat opposite me, perfectly composed, a folder of printed photos spread before her like evidence from a courtroom drama. "I'd like to begin," she said smoothly, "by addressing the ongoing campaign of harassment I've endured." "Campaign?" I asked. She ignored me. "For weeks, this man has filmed me, accused me publicly, and now vandalized his own property to implicate me. I have multiple witnesses who've seen him lurking near my yard at night." "Lurking?" I said, incredulous. "I live next door." Carl leaned forward. "Do you have proof she broke your fence?" I took a deep breath. "Not direct footage, no. But there are footprints and the glass fragments." "Objection," Karen blurted. "He's not a forensic expert." The room fell silent. Even Glenn winced. I smiled. "You're right, Karen. But the officer's report notes your shoe size matches the print. Should I read it aloud?" Her jaw tightened. "Completely circumstantial." Janice raised her voice timidly. "Maybe we should focus on resolving this without blame. This neighborhood used to be so peaceful." Karen seized the opportunity. "Exactly. And it will be peaceful again once certain individuals stop creating drama." That word, drama, coming from her was almost art. I stood slowly, placing my hands on the table. "Here's the truth. Karen's been trespassing on my property, tampering with evidence, and filing false reports. I have footage, eyewitnesses, and a health inspector's findings. I've stayed calm while she's escalated every step. But if this board doesn't handle it, law enforcement will." Karen laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You think the police care about some suburban squabble?" "No," I said. "But they care about falsified HOA documentation." That hit. I saw it, the flicker of panic behind her eyes. The fake letter she'd posted earlier was still under investigation. She hadn't expected me to bring it up in front of witnesses. Glenn cleared his throat. "I think we've heard enough for today. We'll review the evidence privately." Karen stormed out, slamming the door so hard one of her printed photos fluttered to the floor. It was a picture of my pool from weeks ago, taken at night. Proof she'd been on my property again. I pocketed it quietly as I left. That night, things went quiet again, too quiet. No lights in her windows, no slammed doors, no Facebook posts. Just eerie calm. Then, around midnight, the pool filter started making a strange grinding sound. I went outside with a flashlight and froze. Someone had poured something thick and oily into the water. It floated on the surface, shimmering under the beam. Motor oil, maybe transmission fluid. My heart sank. The smell confirmed it. I killed the pump immediately, but it was too late. The oil had seeped through the filtration system. The entire setup, pump, filter, heater, was ruined. Tens of thousands of rupees down the drain. I called the police again. Same officer, same weary sigh. "You got cameras this time?" he asked. "Working perfectly," I said grimly. We pulled the footage. At 11:47 p.m., a figure slipped through the hedge carrying a metal canister. The image was blurry, but the robe, the gait, the shape, it was unmistakable. The officer nodded slowly. "That's enough to press charges." When Karen opened her door, her expression was pure innocence mixed with panic. "Officers, what is this?" "You're under investigation for criminal mischief and property damage," the officer said. "You'll need to come with us for questioning." Her composure cracked. "This is harassment. He's framing me." But this time, no one bought it. Neighbors were outside, watching from porches and windows. For once, she was the one on display. After they left, I sat by the ruined pool, staring at the rainbow film floating across the surface. The satisfaction I expected didn't come right away. It felt heavier than I'd imagined, like winning an argument by burning the whole house down. Still, the silence was intoxicating. For the first time in months, I slept without waking up to her voice echoing down the street. The next morning, Glenn called. So, Karen's been temporarily removed from the board. Pending, her situation. Good, I said. Maybe now things will settle. He hesitated. She posted bail. She's not in jail. Just watch yourself. I looked out the window. Her car was gone, her blinds drawn. But something told me she wasn't done. Karen wasn't built to retreat quietly. She'd wait, plan, and find a way to turn victim again. So, I drained the pool completely, scrubbed every inch, and replaced the water. This time, I mixed a special batch of harmless, but highly visible, UV tracer into the filtration system. Invisible by day, electric blue under blacklight. A signature no one could fake. I didn't tell anyone, because I had a feeling, no, a certainty, that she'd come back. And when she did, I wanted the entire neighborhood to see the truth glow on her skin again. For 2 blessed weeks, Karen was invisible. No HOA flyers, no yard signs, no fake legal letters. Her lawn grew wild, her mailbox overflowed, and her porch lights stayed off like she was hiding from her own reflection. The neighborhood relaxed, tension unwinding like a spring finally released. Parents let their kids ride bikes past her house again. Even Glenn started walking his dog without glancing nervously over his shoulder. I spent that time quietly rebuilding my pool system. The oil damage had been bad, but nothing money and patience couldn't fix. I upgraded the pumps, installed a smart filtration setup, and concealed a motion-activated camera within the skimmer housing. Small, waterproof, and invisible. Every inch of the deck was now under silent surveillance. And underneath it all, the water shimmered faintly with that new UV tracer formula, undetectable by sight, safe as rainwater, but unmistakable under blacklight. I wasn't planning revenge anymore. I was preparing insurance, because I knew Karen's ego too well. Silence for her wasn't peace. It was planning. The first sign she was back came on a Sunday morning. A thin envelope slid under my front door. No return address, but the handwriting was hers, sharp, looping, self-important. Inside was a single note: "You'll regret embarrassing me." That was it. No threats, no name, no punctuation. Just a statement of intent. I laughed softly, folded it, and added it to the growing file in my desk drawer labeled Karen, Evidence. Then I waited. 3 nights later, my sensors tripped at 1:18 a.m. The phone buzzed once, and I opened the app. The pool cam showed motion near the fence line. A figure in dark clothes this time. No robe, no bright sleeves. Smarter. But not smart enough. She crept toward the water, crouched near the edge, and poured something from a small plastic container. The tracer shimmered as the liquid hit. She paused, staring at it, maybe confused it wasn't reacting. Then she dipped a hand into the pool and rubbed it along the rail, exactly where I'd laid my new UV mixture. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her retreat through the hedge. By dawn, I knew what she'd done. The smell of chlorine was heavier than usual. She'd dumped some kind of over-concentrated bleach or cleaning agent into the pool. It wasn't enough to ruin the system again, but it was damage all the same. So, I called Glenn, not the police this time. "You might want to check the clubhouse security logs," I said. "Karen's been active again." He groaned audibly. "Please tell me you're joking." "Not even a little." "And Glenn, maybe plan a surprise inspection for tomorrow. Bring the HOA board." The next evening, right before sunset, Glenn and 2 board members, Janice and Carl, arrived to evaluate reported disturbances. I greeted them pleasantly, offered lemonade, and guided them to the backyard. The pool shimmered like glass. "She's saying you're contaminating again," Glenn said wearily. "Then let's see." I flipped on the floodlight. The moment the UV kicked in, everyone gasped. The rails, the steps, the tiles, everywhere Karen had touched, glowed in brilliant, unmistakable streaks of electric blue. "What on earth?" Janice whispered. "Harmless tracer," I said. "It marks anyone who tampers with the property. Watch this." I walked to the side of the yard, aimed the handheld UV flashlight toward Karen's house, and swept it across her porch. There it was, handprints glowing faintly on her doorknob, her gate latch, even the handle of her garden sprayer. Proof she'd been here. Carl let out a low whistle. "She's cooked." "Quite possibly," I said. The timing couldn't have been better, because at that exact moment, her car pulled into the driveway. She froze when she saw us gathered there, the board, the lights, the evidence blazing like neon gilt. She tried to compose herself, stepping out slowly, holding a grocery bag as camouflage. "Evening," she called out, voice too casual. "What's going on here?" "Karen," Glenn said, tired but firm, "we need to talk." Her eyes darted to the pool, saw the glowing streaks, and stiffened. "What is that?" "More of his illegal chemicals." "It's residue," I said. "Residue you left." She laughed, shrill and brittle. "You think I'd go anywhere near your stupid pool after everything? Please." "Funny," I said, "because the tracer says otherwise." I turned the UV beam toward her hands. The grocery bag dropped as the light hit her skin, glowing bright blue from wrist to fingertip. The entire group gasped. Karen froze, then shoved her hands into her pockets. "It's paint," she blurted. I was painting the porch." "In the middle of the night?" I asked quietly. Her mouth opened, then shut again. The silence stretched long and cold. Glenn rubbed his temples. "Karen, I think you should go inside." She didn't move. Her face twisted, fury mixing with humiliation. Then she pointed at me. "You did this. You're harassing me, you're poisoning me, and I swear I'll—" "Enough," Glenn snapped, louder than I'd ever heard him. "You're done. Officially." That word "done" hit like a hammer. Karen blinked, stunned, then stormed inside, slamming her door hard enough to make the porch light flicker. The HOA board filed an official report the next day. Karen was removed from all committees permanently, fined for damages, and issued a restraining order forbidding her from approaching my property. Glenn delivered the paperwork himself, shaking his head the whole time. "I should have seen it earlier," he said. "She's been a nightmare for years. You just finally made her show her true colors." "Blue ones, apparently," I said. He laughed for the first time in months. "You're not wrong." For a while, life returned to normal. Kids splashed in the clubhouse pool again. Neighbors stopped whispering. My evenings became peaceful rituals of quiet water and calm reflection. But something about the stillness bothered me. Not fear, intuition. Karen wasn't the kind to disappear without one final scene. It came a week later, in the form of a knock on my door. Standing there was Mark, her husband. His face looked hollow, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. He held a manila envelope in both hands. "I just want this to be over," he said. Inside were photographs, close-ups of my pool, my backyard, my car, all taken from Karen's window. Dozens of them, time-stamped, printed, some with notes scrawled in the margins. "Observe at night. Possible illegal wiring." Even my license plate. "She was documenting you," Mark said quietly. "She thought she could prove something. I told her to stop. She wouldn't." I nodded slowly. "Is she still?" "She's leaving," he said. "Her sister in Arizona offered her a place to stay. I convinced her it's time." For a moment, I saw something human in his eyes. Relief, exhaustion, even guilt. He wasn't her accomplice. He was collateral. "Thank you," I said. "You did the right thing." He nodded once, then left without another word. That evening, as I sat beside the water, I thought about everything, the absurdity, the escalation, the endless back and forth that started with one simple trespass. Karen hadn't been a villain out of malice. She'd been addicted to control, to the illusion that she ruled her little suburban kingdom. Losing that control had broken her. I didn't celebrate. I just watched the reflections dance across the surface, calm and endless, until the last trace of light disappeared. But fate, it seems, doesn't like unfinished business. Because 2 nights later, a neighbor texted me a photo. Karen's house, her car packed, tail lights glowing in the dark. Under the UV floodlight, her hands were still glowing.